Good evening, everyone. I'll call to order the Marin Water Board meeting of April 2nd, 2024. Terry, roll call, please.
Director Larry Russell, Director Monty Schmidt,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
Vice President Matt Sampson,
Here.
and President Ranjiv Kush.
Here. Do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved. Second.
Terry, are there any public comments on the agenda?
There are none.
Could we have a vote then to adopt the agenda, please?
Yes, Director Schmidt.
Aye.
Director Smith.
Yes.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
We're now going to move to closed session to discuss anticipated litigation. But first, do we have any public comments on closed session items?
There are none.
Okay, then. With that, we'll adjourn to closed session. Good evening again, everybody. We'll reconvene our open session for today's board meeting. I'll begin by reporting that our closed session was adjourned at 6:05 p.m. with no actionable items to report. Terry, do we have public comments on items that are not on today's agenda?
Yes, we have Mr. Phil Sauter.
Good evening. Thursdays are our broom pulling day out in the valley, so I missed the board retreat last month and have relied on my colleagues and a limited sampling of the online recording to get a sense of what was discussed. I was impressed to see comments by staff regarding the use of data-driven and targeted outreach to high water users as a way to maximize the impact of what is still a very limited conservation budget. I have every reason to believe that if we can design effective programs to reach a small subset of our customers who use large amounts of potable water outdoors, we can avoid having to burden the large majority of customers who don't want to pay for expensive projects to source and treat water that they don't need and won't use. Furthermore, this subset of super users are the very customers who will be hit hardest by the next drought. If not financially, then by having to finally lose the water-intensive landscape that they've been able to maintain in times of plenty, and with the financial support of all customers who keep paying capital maintenance fees for supply sources of water they don't use. On a related topic, someone pointed out a statement made during the retreat that if the district were to follow the lead of other water districts, increasing our use of recycled water, our bills might increase fivefold. As I imagine my bill increasing 5 times and our annual budget surpassing $500 million, I realized that one of us must have misunderstood the comment. That's a problem with going through such a long recording. My preference has always been to come up with effective programs to reduce the amount of potable water used outdoors, and only when that has failed, to consider expanding the use of recycled water for outdoor irrigation. It would seem a shame to turn our backs on the possibility of limited expansion of recycled water delivery for small clusters of heavy outdoor water users. I hope that the demand management presentation in May will include a financial analysis of both higher incentives to reduce outdoor demand, along with alternatives to satisfy some of that demand with non-potable water. I'm sure that with actual data to guide us, that we'll be making better decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, we'll move on to directors and general managers announcements, starting with directors. Monty?
Yeah, last week I was at the Cell-Mounted Restoration Federation conference, which was held in Santa Rosa, and it's pretty much the premier salmon restoration and river restoration conference in California. And, time and again, the work that we are doing on Lagunitas Creek shows up in numerous scientific studies. The results of our efforts are recognized as providing leadership in the space of river restoration and salmon restoration. And Eric Ettinger was there, and I think and many other staff were recognized. So I just want to share that with our community, that among the other things that we do in the district, our work on Lagunitas Creek and our salmon runs is very, very well respected.
It's encouraging, Monty. Thank you. Matt?
Thank you. Yep. On the 21st of March, we had our first quarterly watershed meeting of this year. We had two items on there. One is coming to the board tonight for approval, which I'm excited about. And that was after a presentation by the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy and the renewal of our One TAM contract. It's been a 10-year 10 years with One TAM. And now we're looking to renew for another set of the same time period, as well as a 5-year strategy in terms of work, what's going to be involved with the funding for that. So that was item number one. The second item was the second reading or second presentation of our watershed recreation feasibility study. That should be coming to the board for a full vote on the 16th of April or sometime. So that's it. End of report.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Jed?
Yes, we had the Finance and Administration Committee and special meeting of the board meeting on Thursday, March 28th. We went through the monthly financial update, which showed that our income and expenses are relatively on target as predicted. Expenses slightly behind, which is probably a good thing. We're saving some money, but it also reflects that we have some hiring to do. So Alex, go get them. We'll fill those slots and we'll help you out any way you need. We also had our general counsel had an overview of the Brown Act, which was super helpful, called a version of training for us and reminders of what we need to do to be thoughtful and compliant, as well as looking over our campaign laws, some of which have changed for those who may be running again. And then we had a fairly detailed conversation about dual noticing of our committee meetings. And I thought it was a healthy discussion. And I wouldn't mind just opening it up here for a second. If Monty, I know you weren't there, or if Larry, you had any additional comments, you chimed in, but I'm not sure when you signed off. But we did talk about the importance of when we want to have dual notices, when we want to have the full board present at these meetings. We gave the staff some guidance on some ways that we might want to change it. And as an example, with some folks that may not have been there, maybe this is the time, if you had any comments on that this would be a time that you might want to do it.
I don't think we can actually do that. It's not agendized.
We can do just a report to talk about what was accomplished at the committee meeting.
Okay.
But I don't think we can have a full discussion on the actual item, but we do intend to bring back an item for the board, and they can discuss fully at that time.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Be good to review. That's it.
Thanks, Jed. Larry? Nothing from me either. So Ben, anything from your side? Okay, then we'll move on to our consent calendar, which today has 4 items on it. Approval of the minutes from both our retreat on March 14th and the last regular board meeting on March 19th. Adoption of a resolution approving emergency contracting provisions for the West Peak power pole removal, which actually, Molly, I want to come back to. Number 3 is approval of the One TAM MOU, including the strategic plan from 2024 to 2028 and the work plan for 2024-2025, and authorization for the general manager to sign the One TAM MOU. The last item is to authorize the general manager to recruit and hire one program manager for the district's AMI program. But my question is, the second item on the resolution approving emergency contracting provisions for the West Peak power pole removal, I feel like we have already approved that.
Actually you did. So that's very astute of you to notice, President Cush. This is, it's a requirement of the code that in order to continue the contract under emergencies, no bid circumstances, the board needs to revisit that determination each regular board meeting until the emergency work is completed. So we do need to have the board consider a resolution, and it's by 4/5 vote that it would be necessary to pass in order to continue that work under the emergency contract that we did.
I really thought I had caught you on something. I was so excited.
You'll see it again next time.
Okay,
So
okay.
try again if you want.
Okay. Any public comments and items in the consent calendar?
There are none.
Okay, then do we have a motion to approve our consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Terry.
Yes, Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye. Now we'll move to our regular agenda. Item 8A is our 2024 Annual Strategic Work Plan.
Good evening, Board. Adrienne Mertens, Communications Public Affairs Manager. And, oh, 1 second. Get in presentation mode. There we go. I am indeed back here, this time talking about 2024 Annual Strategic Work Plan. And really, this is an update to the Annual Strategic Work Plan. And here on behalf of all of my colleagues who have been involved in development of the work plan, and just wanted to do a quick overview for the benefit of the public. Of course, you're very familiar with the process we've been through to get here. But on February 13th, the board did approve our 5-year strategic work plan. This includes 5 strategic goals and 24 objectives that really set our overall direction and priorities for the next 5 years. And within that is 113 actions that we've identified will help to get to those goals. And then once we've established the strategic work plan, staff went back to start developing our annual work plan, which will be part of our process in working on our efforts towards the goals over the next 5 years. Each year, we will develop an annual work plan. So on March 14th at the annual board retreat, staff reviewed and discussed our annual work plan with the board and had great full day of discussion around that and got input back from the board on what is in the current work plan for 2024. And so tonight, after the retreat, actually first, our staff went back, reviewed that input we received from the board and incorporated it into the work plan where it was possible. So tonight I'm here to provide an update on how that input was incorporated. And so you'll see on the slides that follow, it's not the full work plan. As an attachment to the staff report that's in the agenda packet is the full work plan. Tonight we'll only be reviewing the sections where changes were made since the last time you saw it at the board retreat. Those changes are highlighted in orange throughout the slides. So first, at the retreat on goal 1, our reliable water supply goal, we did hear from the board interest in adding a timeline for the AMI work that the district will be doing over the next 5 years, and specifically for the pilot program that we plan to implement in year 1. AMI is referenced in several places throughout the work plan. We've really put the details of that in goal 1 and in objective 1. And so we've updated 1E to identify that we will, as part of those actions for year 1, establish a timeline and plan to do that by Q3. And then also under goal 1, but in objective 2, we did hear from the board interest in establishing an emergency plan to augment our water supply during times of water shortages. And so under 2A, you can see we've added that as an additional item to those actions for year 1, and we'll begin that work in Q4. I might have skipped some. There we go. Also on goal 1 and objective 3, we heard from the board interest in expanding objective 3A on our work around recycled water partnerships to also call out our sanitation agencies and our work there to continue to foster and develop those partnerships. So we've added language here to make sure we're capturing that in our efforts. For goal 2, which is our resilient water system goal. First, I do want to mention it's not shown, but we did get feedback on objective 1 from the board on some interest in looking at accelerating our infrastructure assessment activities and doing so with consultant support. And so Staff didn't capture that in this work plan, but as part of the assessment activities, consultant support is already built into those plans. And staff does feel that it is an aggressive timeline with what we've said already in the plan. And so it's probably not feasible to compress that timeline anymore and expedite further. And again, we already have consultant support that's going to be assisting with the assessment process.
Quick question on that one. Is that that's the assessment of the infrastructure currently right now in terms of threat and vulnerability throughout the district?
Yes, in goal 1, we have condition assessment of a whole number of different aspects of our infrastructure. And I think that's a good characterization around threats and opportunities for the infrastructure. So we're going to be analyzing, for example, for wildfire hardness, right? Go through our system and develop our prioritized lists. We're also doing condition assessment on the different elements of our infrastructure, pipes, tanks, pipes, but tanks and pump stations, the physical observations and inspections. And then we're going to roll up these half a dozen condition assessments into a kind of apples to apples priority. And that'll be kind of this 10, 30-year CIP effort.
Okay.
Development.
Okay. It would be good to continue to update on that because as a vulnerability exists, I'd like to address that or have support for that. And when I hear 10, 20 years, that timeline doesn't really line up with what I would think would be a responsible decision, but I'm assuming that's the whole package, not every specific piece.
Yeah. So just to clarify, it's a good point. It's really to have an open, robust prioritization process. It's really designed to inform that, and presumably the highest priorities, right, rise to the top. So that's the theory. And the long-term CIP is intended to give us and the public an understanding of what the long-term investment may look like. An example is dams don't last forever, right? But there's nothing immediate that we know of. We are doing some further investigatory work, but at some point, is it 20 years or 30 years or 50 years out? We don't yet know. Would we want to anticipate some work on dams, as an example, for treatment plants, big efforts? And how do they fit into this long-term planning effort that will adaptively manage as time goes on? But it's, the intent is just to give us that long-term look in a sense of, do we bend the curve on pipe replacements is kind of where this came from. If you recall, some of those graphs during the budget didn't yet move to a getting ahead of the curve on all our different assets. So a longer time frame gives us a better sense of, at different rates of investment, what's that curve look like.
Right. No, and thank you for that explanation. It's helpful. I think, with not understanding completely all of our vulnerabilities or risks based on without an assessment, it's hard to address the ones that are really important right now. So if this year is tough in terms of staff time and the consultant availability, it'd be nice to have that pretty quickly, or at least start next year so that we can, right. Thank you. Good.
Also for goal 2, objective 2, we did hear from the board that they would like to see item C, bond funding opportunities, brought into this year's work plan. When staff went back and discussed input later, we realized this is actually one of those areas that has overlap with another section, our goal 4, our financial stability section. And so we've just referenced that it's captured there. And in goal 4, the work this year is to begin the work of bond funding for near-term selection of projects. And that's going to happen in Q4. And so that was an oversight on our part in not capturing it here in some way. And then also on goal 2 and objective 3, we heard from the board to add an outcome or result this year for item F, the paving restoration requirements objective, or excuse me, action. And so staff have added a more complete milestone for this item. And that is to complete assessment and begin meeting with jurisdictions by Q4. I think we had left that as it was ongoing before, and so we've updated to be more concrete about our actions. Also for goal 2 and objective 5, we did hear interest from the board in adding item C, carbon neutrality, to our activities in this year's work plan. And so staff have brought this item 5C into the work plan this year, and you'll see it reflected there with our efforts planned to begin by Q4. And then also in goal 2 for objective 6, the board did express interest in better clarifying and communicating board member roles during an emergency as part of our emergency response plan update. And so we've added language to item 6A to ensure that we've captured that, and we'll capture it in our efforts this year. And that work will happen by Q4. And then moving into goal 3, our watershed stewardship goal. For objective 1, we heard at the retreat from the board interest in incorporating partnerships for Redwood Creek into the work plan, acknowledging that even though it's not within the district, we want to do what we can where possible. And so staff have added item 1D to make sure that this is captured in this year's work plan, and that would be an ongoing effort as opportunities arise to participate. And then goal 3, objective 3, we did hear from the board some input on more clearly communicating the district's role in conservation, and specifically regarding our work to protect animal species on the watershed. And so we've just adjusted the language here to ensure that that's captured and will be within our efforts this year. And then under objective 4 of the watershed stewardship goal, we did hear from the board some input on better describing the timeline for the priority outcomes of the watershed recreation management plan feasibility study and what that's going to look like over the next 4 years. And so we have added as a milestone that we'll be developing the timeline for that, the implementation of those priority outcomes by Q3. Also under goal 3, but objective 5, our facilities focused objective for the watershed. Another item related to the recreation management plan feasibility study was interest in incorporating our recreation management plans into the district's other watershed planning documents. And so we've captured that under item 5A, our roads and trails management plan, to acknowledge that we need to incorporate a section or chapter in some way, make recreation management a part of those documents as well. And then moving into goal 4, our fiscal responsibility goal, objective 1, financial stability. We did hear input from the board on considering other potential additional funding sources as part of item 1C, our non-rate revenue updates. And so we have just added some further clarification in there to explain what we're talking about, including parking fees, cell tower leases, and other sorts of revenues. And then for objective 2 of goal 4, we heard from the board interest in, when we're reporting on the connection fees during our connection fee study item, to make sure that we are showing the whole picture of what the impacts are, including potential growth in water demand. And so we've clarified the language there to make sure that was captured and that it will be in our effort. And then for goal 5, our organizational excellence goal, for objective 1, we did hear input on ensuring that we clarify how the item G, how this this item contributes to strengthen internal communication amongst all levels of staff throughout the organization. So in year 1, we were introducing an internal newsletter, and so we've revised the language of this item to make sure that that's clear and better captures the interest we heard from the board. And then also on objective 1, we heard from the board, and it's not shown and not captured this year, but wanted to make sure we addressed it. Interest in adding potential partnership with College of Marin around developing workforce development courses as a partnership opportunity with them for professional development and career paths. This is something that we've captured. Staff don't think that it's feasible to get to this year, given how much we have identified for our organizational excellence goals, but we are looking to incorporate that into future work plans as part of the strategic plan. And then for objective 2 of goal 5, we heard from the board that we needed to do a little more work to clarify what our intentions are for academic partnerships in our first year of our strategic plan. And so we've tried to better clarify the language here. We did hear some ideas from the board around what types of projects we could engage with academic partners on. Staff to have some ideas as well. And we do believe we need to do more work to figure out and shape what those projects are and find the right partner institution for that. And so that's really what our intentions are, and hoping to get to that work by Q3 to really have a solid plan and project and potential partner for that. And that brings me to our recommendation for the staff to, or for the board to accept the 2024 annual strategic work plan. And I'll take any questions.
Thank you for that summary, Adrienne, and thank you for all the consideration of the board comments during the retreat. Director's comments, a question start with you this time, Larry. Jed?
Looks like a busy Q4. I guess my main question is, when you put a milestone as that you will begin in Q4, that doesn't seem like much of a milestone to me. So maybe some thought process around how we can hold ourselves accountable. Because what does begin mean?
Well, I think it's different for different activities. Some would be initiating the project, bringing on outside support. Some would be, something different. I think it is a bit heavy in Q4, and I noticed that as well. In part, we're already in Q2, so I have been thinking about next year in December trying to do this, get it done, so we have the full 12 months and 4 quarters. So I don't know if there were particular comments. We can take a look at it. When we initiate an effort, an activity, a project, an initiative, we'll be coming to the board and talking about the kickoff in some detail and the schedule. So that'll be happening at upcoming committee meetings and board meetings.
I think the one that just stood out for me is the need for an emergency water supply plan in case drought happens, and starting that for another 9 months gives me a little concern. But right now we have rain, so it feels okay, but I feel like we're in a crisis right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. I did talk to Paul about that. We do feel we have somewhat of not a head start on that, but we did a lot of thinking at the very recent drought. So that was part of it. But that's a good point. I'll be thinking about that one.
Jed, I was actually I had a question about that one. the emergency water supply? Because I know we have our water shortage contingency plan in place, and I imagine that's the first thing that we're going to be relying on. What we would do to augment supply in the case of emergency, I don't know if it's now's the time, but it'd be great to get some idea,
It's
thought.
it'll be a difficult discussion. And really, we found ourselves in the last drought in the scenario of actually, what do we do if we can't augment our supply in a way that our system, we were looking at rail and trucking. So it was that kind of like, what are we going to do if we're actually out? That sort of planning. And of course, that's really this last resort, because all the work we're doing now, moving ahead with the near-term projects are pushing that back in the long-term projects. And the plan where we're headed will have projects that'll be designed and through CEQA and ready to go. So the further we get, the better it's going to look. But I do appreciate the interest of just understanding what the plan is.
Yeah, or our options, what our options are. Great.
Right.
Monty? Sorry, Jed, are you done?
I'm good.
Okay.
Sure. Again, Adrian, thank you for capturing a lot of input that we provided on this. And I just have a couple of questions. In the watershed stewardship section, I'm still a concern that I've had is what happened with our recreation management plan and turned into a feasibility study, and now we're weaving it into roads and trails. I'm still not sure exactly how that's all going to fall together. I know by Q4 we're going to evaluate projects and update management practices and inclusion and so on and so forth. I think between now and then, obviously the key is getting clear about how recreation, visitor experience, whatever we might call it, is woven into that, and make sure that we're not burdening the roads and trails management plan with recreation management. If it makes sense to keep them separate, then and do them as two separate items, I think that I'm not sure I understand. I know the pros and cons and what our recommendation really is. They both need to be addressed. So maybe this is something for our next watershed committee meeting to have a discussion about how to manage these two really important tasks, whether it makes sense to weave them together or separately. The other thing that I'm noticing here is additional funds need to be identified is pretty much pegged to almost the entire objective 5. And so, and for other items that are in this work plan, I'd like to have a discussion about how we're going to meet these needs, because we can't have them in here. And I have a vision that they're going to be completed if we need to identify additional funds. So how will we go about doing that?
Yeah, a fair number of those aren't budgeted. So I felt we needed to identify that to the board. Yet, as we heard at last finance, we are running with a bit of a surplus. So I haven't identified some significant funding issues in regards to the work plan. And as needed, we'd be coming to the board. But I'm not seeing an obstacle there.
Okay. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. That sounds positive. How do we make sure, what do we need to be doing in terms of making decisions to approve the additional funding that does need to be identified and approved? So
yeah, I don't see yet that there's a board authority needed for funding. If there is, we'll bring that when we initiate the effort. But I'm pretty comfortable that were the board to accept the annual work plan, that within our current budget and funding, we'll be able to generally move it forward. There may be some minor exceptions I'll be coming to the board on.
Okay, so maybe, I mean, just so because others in our community may see these same words and wonder how it will come about. Maybe there's a different designation that these aren't, additional funds don't need to be identified, that additional funds are available
Yeah.
or non-budgeted funds are available,
Right.
something to the
Something
effect
like that. Yeah.
because if there are places where we don't, that would be really important to identify, because I wouldn't imagine that it's reasonable to have an objective to complete something if there aren't sufficient funds to be
Right.
able to support it.
Right.
And so I just would want to know which of any of the tasks in this in our
So-
plan fall in that category.
So if I could, for clarity, because we may be making an action tonight, the action could be with the amendment to modify that column from funds needed or available funds. I don't know exactly how it's worded. Within budget or funds needed. Right. So, I'll modify it. We'll say within budget or, budget modification needed. And I don't believe we have any modification of the budget. I think I understand your point and we'll clarify it.
Okay. Great.
Thanks, Mati. Matt?
Adrian, thanks for taking all this in and putting in there. And so I do want to touch on, Monty, your comment about that, because I think it's important to continue that discussion. I don't want to beat a dead horse, Ben, if you have a solution moving forward, but this is really the opportunity for the board to prioritize projects, especially with funds, if they are a limiting reagent on this. And so having that understanding of almost like a red line above and below what makes the cut and what doesn't, I think is it within the purview of the board, especially if funding is going to be limited on that as we look to prioritize things. So if funding does become limited, it'd be good to know whether we have some sort of mid-year type budget approval process or not, but that would be important for the piece.
Just if I could, just an example, on goal 1, objective 1, C, implementation of water loss control and leak detection program recommendations. That project's ongoing. But we don't yet fully know what recommendations we'll be bringing to the board and what equipment or other costs there may be. However, based upon our understanding of costs, I'm not expecting it to be above my authority to buy another device for dollars, for example, with the surplus funds. So we'd be able to do that. So yeah, I think we'll clarify this.
Okay, great. No, it's appreciated that way. It makes things a little bit easier for me to understand too. So thank you for that. And then actually that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Adrian, just following all that, just one very specific item on goal 2, objective 5, regarding carbon neutrality. I think the recommendation in the retreat was to begin by estimating our current baseline carbon footprint and so no need to change it in the plan itself, but I think just a note that, as we begin to move forward with that, starting with, just a focus on our current estimate. Okay, I think, so. Yes.
I have a comment on that. I'm just thinking about it. We agreed or signed up to the Ockley agreement or something like that. It's about reducing carbon. Probably it would be a good time to get an update of where we are with that. That must have been 10 years ago that we agreed to that. So let's find out where we are on the Ockley.
Okay, any public comments, Terry?
There are none. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Sauter. Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah, figured. Thank you. And I'll definitely support staff's recommendation for approval. I was really pleased to see that goal 1, objective 1 was to find ways to reduce demand for potable water. Not only does this act as a buffer for potential drought conditions, but it also helps reduce the need for further large capital investments, which show up on every customer's water bill. No matter what I do, I don't expect my capital fee to ever go down. And all I can hope for is that it doesn't keep going up. Anything I can do to help Marin Water's customers to live within our means, I'm willing to do. Talking with friends, neighbors, and acquaintances, I realize I'm not alone. The vast majority of folks I've been speaking with over the past year or so are still living the lessons of past droughts, and they're often surprised when they hear of customers who are using 400 gallons a day or more. Most of them don't realize that a good percentage of their bill goes to pay for capital projects that enable this wasteful use of a valuable and increasingly limited resource. But they'll get the message soon enough as some of these looming capital projects become better publicized. If I could make one request, it would be for staff and the board to broaden the public discussion of the trade-offs between reduced demand and increased supply. It's difficult for a lot of folks to sit through 3 to 5 hour meetings and 40-page presentations several times a month. And it's limiting to have 3 minutes to comment on issues that affect our daily lives and monthly budgets. Most folks don't have the time to become as informed as they need to be if they want to be proactive rather than merely react to a decision that's been 90% made by the time they hear about it. One possible idea is that our board members and staff follow the lead of our county supervisors and hold meetings in their respective communities to share district plans and hear more from their constituents. At least in my division, I think you'd find a lot more support for increased conservation and gratitude for those efforts than you will for a new reservoir or a new desal plant. Many thanks for the presentation and for making conservation of potable water goal 1 and objective 1. Also, during the presentation, I heard a comment about an emergency need for water supply. And I just want to throw out there that a 4 million gallon per day savings, I believe roughly equates to 4,000 more acre feet banked in our reservoirs. It would be nice to start saving that water sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more speaker, Miss Marilyn Price, please.
Yeah, hi. Well, I too want to say I was really pleased. I got my water bill yesterday, and the insert that you had, I just hope a lot of people read it, and that's my fear, is that they don't. That you started out with saying how important it is to preserve our most precious natural resources. So you're starting out with that, and then you're going into the tips of what people can do, and then more on the back. I thought it was quite excellent. I didn't see the standard little magazine thing that you put in, but this was the only insert, which I thought was very appropriate. So I hope we continue to do that. I'm wondering if you are checking. I was just reading where Las Vegas is having a terrible time having enough water and worried about the future. I'm wondering if your communication people are checking with other cities that have had this problem and what luck they have had if they've been able to track it with educational stuff. What works? We've got a guy here who lives in Mill Valley who did the Got Milk ad. Maybe somebody, Rich Silverstein is I think his name, could develop an ad, something really catchy that you open your envelope with the water with the bill, and you see this thing that just pops out at you, that why you have to conserve it even now. So those were some of the things that I thought about. But again, I'm glad you're doing this early and reaching some of the people, but how do we reach more? I just participated in a Nextdoor thing. As you all probably know, there are these angry Nextdoor messages that go around. I've seen about 4 of them, and I usually chime in to tell them. I told them to this one, I told them about she had a $600 bill. Did you check your recent insert, and see, how to get help from the water board? So just whatever we can do, that's going to be our cheapest source to conserve our water, is to reach the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then do we have a motion to approve our 2024 annual strategic work plan? I think that includes the clarifications that we'll be making on the resources question, the final column.
So moved.
Second.
Terry, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes. Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Yes.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
and President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. We'll move to item 8B, which is an update on the water supply roadmap, conveyance alternatives. Welcome, Paul and colleagues.
With this, I'm going to step out as the group that I work with, the Nature Conservancy, also does work in Sonoma County on water management issues. And so to avoid any conflict of interest, I'm going to recuse myself from this presentation.
Thanks, Monty.
Good evening, Board. Paul Sellier, Water Resources Director. I'm joined, as you can see, with Tim Taylor from Carollo and Xavier Arias from Woodard and Curran. So tonight we have an exciting update on the conveyance project. So this is the conveyance of winter water from Russian River to a Marin Reservoir in concept. And we're going to walk through a few reminders, just kind of set the scene a little bit of how we got here. And then Tim will take us through the process, just kind of reminding us what the options are and then how we got to the short list. And then Xavier will talk us through kind of this concept of phasing the projects. Some of these conveyance projects are readily lend themselves to phasing, and we'll close with next steps. Okay, so we've seen this slide a few times now. This is our integrated roadmap for water supply that the board approved in February of 23. And since that time, you know, we've been working through those broad areas on the left there, in district improvements, the Sonoma Marin partnerships, local storage, new supplies, and of course, conservation. And tonight, we're really going to be focusing in on the Sonoma Marin, and in particular, the conveyance to storage aspect. So again, all of these things are progressing in the background, and what are supposed to be green bubbles around Electrify Sewell-Hooley Pump Station, those short-term actions are all ongoing right now, as is everything pretty much on this roadmap is kind of moving in parallel. So tonight we're focusing on this roadmap, and we've looked at the roadmap in terms of a portfolio. Like if we were investors, we have a nice broad portfolio of water supply options, but we haven't talked much about the other benefit of this roadmap, which is flexibility. And so, of course, it's all sort of time-based, so that's a constant for us through time.
Look to a different file.
Wow.
How'd you do that?
I don't know. Moment, please. Okay, we're back. This is very strange.
The other files still open.
Yeah. Okay, so conservation is sort of a first for us. It's the first step in all of our water supply projects in the portfolio. And that's going to be ongoing through time. We're going to continue to enhance and adapt and change that program over time. And as we think about it, we know we're doing in-district improvements. And so shown here as examples are the Electrify Sewell-Hooley and the Phoenix to Bontempi connection. And you see the white circle, you know, bounded by orange there. That's sort of a milestone. So once we complete the Electrify Sewell-Hooley project, we'll be moving into, you know, the Phoenix to Bontempi connection. And at that point, there's an orange circle indicating that's a decision point from which we may go further. We may decide that we want to build other in-district improvements. So there are these sort of milestones and decision points, and the decision points you can think of either as decision points or kind of off-ramps. And another example being, we know that as for example, we have a system today that we need to optimize how we operate it. But as we add features and supplies to that system through time, we're going to want to adapt how we operate the system to take advantage of those new supplies. So for example, in the conveyance, we're currently in the pre-design phase, and there'll be a decision point the board will decide we're going to design a phase one of whichever the preferred project turns out to be. And then a subsequent decision to construct that element that we just designed. And at that point, we'll have reached a milestone for that first phase of construction, and we'd operate that system for a while and sort of assess it. And similarly, in storage, in parallel, we may be in, we're currently in pre-design. And if, for example, the board's heard the Nicasio flashboards example, if that's a short-term project for us that we can jump on and proves to be beneficial and feasible, we might construct that in parallel. And so again, you would construct that initial project, you would operate it, and then make a subsequent decision saying, well, do I need to go back, for example, to conveyance? Oh, wow. Sorry, you're not seeing my screen. It says it's the closed session is in progress.
Oh. Don't know what happened.
Maybe stop share first.
Okay, let's go back. And you're right. Is that yours?
This one.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, so I mean, we haven't lost the flow yet, have we? Okay, so we're still going. So the idea here is that as we move through time, there are going to be points where we can continue to add phases if we think there's a need for us to do that. And as we throw in the other examples for storage, but the takeaway here is that there are these decision points, and the board will have this flexibility to not only choose which of these elements we're constructing, but there's a flexibility built in time in terms of when we construct these. I'm scared to use the mouse now. So then just reviewing our.
Sorry, Paul. I mean, this is quite I think a well-considered way to illustrate how we'll be moving forward. We're going to be speaking about conveyance today. I'm assuming we are in the planning pre-design.
Correct.
Stage. So we are coming up to the decision point. We'll be talking about the schedule for that decision point later in the presentation.
Not so much schedule today. This is really just introducing this concept of phasing and the ability to select elements of a much larger project and when you'll be able to construct them. So tonight's presentation is really about identifying the proposed shortlist, right? Remember, we're screening the 13 different alternatives down to 2 or 3 alternatives that we want to carry forward in a greater level of detail. So we've completed that screening process, and that's sort of what we'll be getting into in the next part of the presentation. This is just sort of setting up what you'll see in some of that presentation in terms of how we may think about the construction timeline and phasing of those projects.
Thanks.
And so this sort of approach is kind of an adaptive pathway, and you can imagine there may be vertical lines jumping between each of these, identifying what pathway you might choose through time. So our project goal then is really enhancing the reliability, resiliency, flexibility of the water system to improve service to Marin Water customers. And as I mentioned, we've taken the 13 alternatives and run them through a proposed evaluation criteria, which are just project characteristics, each of which has a number of metrics associated with them, and each of those metrics is scored individually, and sort of the roll-up score is what the criteria score will be. And so typically the highest score for each criterion would be the most favorable. And just use the mouse again. Click to exit. Yeah, I can't.
You need to just shut that file. Click that.
Just exit.
Yeah. Okay, good. That's a very strange one. Okay, so typically the alternatives are scored, and the highest score it represents the best alternative. So our criteria then, right? Water reliability and sustainability. And so what would represent a high score or favorable project score here, or criteria score, excuse me, would be a project that adds, some substantial, sustainable dry year yield to the water district. So a project that would do that would score, a 5 or a 3 out of the maximum, essentially. And in terms of flexibility and resiliency, a project that would address, substantially improve the water system resiliency would receive a high score here. If it was a project that allowed us to adapt to climate change, for example, would achieve a high score here. And similarly on flexibility, if there's a project that provides operational flexibility for the district, then that would receive a high score. And in terms of schedule and implementation, just as you might expect, projects that we can construct in sort of the fastest timeline benefit from a high score in this kind of category. And you might think, okay, what affects timelines for projects could be, regulatory complexity, for example. That might be another thing. And then water quality, I think we felt it was important to have as a criteria since we are dealing with a water project for drinking water supply. But in this particular case, all of the sources of water are the same. It's Russian River water. So it wasn't really, and not surprisingly, I guess, a great separator for us in terms of supply, but it's just felt too important to not have it. And then environmental and social stewardship. So for example, projects that have the least or minimize long-term environmental impacts would score well in this case. And in terms of social stewardship, the team was thinking along the lines of, projects that are least disruptive to existing land uses. And then I think economic and financial sort of speak for themselves, but these are projects that are at least impactful to the district relative to the yield that they provide. So I'm going to pass it over to Tim, who's going to walk us through, just kind of remind us the project alternatives and next steps in the project.
Thanks, Paul. So, President Cush and board members, I appreciate the time to come talk to you this evening. Last month, I got kind of into the details of all the alternatives, but as you recall, there was basically 4 main alternatives and then some sub-alternatives, starting with what we're calling the Southern Transmission System, Cotati tanks down to Castagna Pump Station. The Stafford alternatives are from Stafford Lake to Nicasio or Sulahui lakes. The PETA, which is off the Petaluma Aqueduct, would go from the North Marin Aqueduct out to the lakes, Sulahui and Nicasio. And then the Cotati tanks down to the lakes, we just called Cotati 1, 2, and 3. And the very right-hand column just gives you kind of a sense of how long these alignments are. There's other components of each alignment as well, pump stations, electrification for the pump stations, that kind of stuff. Okay. Hi.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think Tim, I'll advance the slide for you. Oh, this is Stephen Birdland. You guys don't want to go through that again?
Right. Paul, can I say just a quick clarification for the good of the order? We're looking at these 4 alternatives with their sub-alternatives built in there. We're at the point in the decision-making process that we're not going to go reevaluate other different alternatives now. These are the ones. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Go to USB drive. Got it. Okay, there you go.
You're gonna have to start sharing again. Okay, let's try this again.
Okay, we want to use the mouse.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Next slide.
So as you recall, the Southern Transmission System basically goes from Cotati tanks. There was 3 alternatives that we looked at. Next slide. And then the Stafford transmission started at the kind of the end of the North Marin pipeline at Stafford Lake out to Sulahui and Nicasio. Next slide. And then the Petaluma is basically a bigger subset of Stafford, where we would build an additional parallel pipeline of the North Marin pipeline so that you were isolated from theirs. And PETA 4 actually moves the connection point up to the 42-inch to maximize the capacity of that 42-inch. Next slide. And then Cotati tanks transmission system obviously is from the tanks down to the reservoirs, fully isolated system, no use of existing facilities. So we then looked at more detailed costs. So the very right-hand side of the table shows you the cost for each sub-alternative, and then what the maximum capacity available for that alternative in the second from the right-hand column. So anywhere from zero additional for the STS systems, because they're not adding into storage, down to 30 MGD for the Cotati. And that 30 is really flexible. It's really whatever, you could buy from Sonoma Water. That could be a custom designed system. Next slide. So then we took the evaluation criteria, all 7 of them, and then assigned a criteria weighting as well as a ranking, and then did the math like us dorky engineers like to do. And the total score ends up in the right-hand column. And you can see the 3 highlighted alternatives are the 3 highest ranked alternatives. President Kush?
Yeah, Tim, thanks. The STS options, Southern Transmission System, as you noted, they don't provide an additional water gain for us. What were the other factors that led you to keep them on the table?
Because they are, for example, PETA 4 could use one of the STS alternatives to maximize additional capacity for PETA 4. So PETA 4, and you'll see it in the kind of the summary slide, PETA 3 has some Stafford alternatives associated with it, and PETA 4 has the STS alternatives associated with it. So incrementally, we can do this phasing as Paul described, and get you additional capacity depending on how much money you're willing to spend.
That's great. Got it.
Tim, just for clarification again, and I apologize for the simple question, but when you're looking at max MGD ranges on some of these PETA projects, is that the range built in if it's building off the STS project?
So if you go back one slide, I think it's the table. Yeah. So let's take the PETA example, PETA 1 through 4. Those ranges, it depends on how much you build. So if you only, because PETA 1 through 3 utilizes the Stafford alternatives, you're limited in the first phase of 10 MGD. So you keep adding on phases, and you'll see it in some of my next slides. But as you add on phases of the project, you're increasing your capacity.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
No, it does. And I'll wait to the rest of the slides, but thank you.
Yeah. Keep going.
These are big dollars.
Yeah.
And if you assume the water usage is purchased, even the simplest one, the Cotati ones, that's more than half our budget, current budget, to buy that much water. Now, we wouldn't need that much water probably, but when you add on the capital, the ones you guys selected or recommended, what the cheapest one is 130. Big dollars.
Yeah, and it really depends on how long you can run the system in any given month or day to maximize, what Sonoma Water is going to allow you to purchase.
Yeah, but on top of that, then you got to add in, let's say you take the 13 MGD, that's give or take 13,000 acre feet a year times $1,500 an acre foot. We're talking.
You wouldn't be pumping for a year.
Yeah.
No,
these are winter waters.
No, of course.
5 months or so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe that should be adjusted in the max MGD because, that's, you really aren't, you could maybe produce that flow rate, but you're not going to produce that quantity.
Correct. In terms of volume. Yeah. So you have to look at what's the maximum capacity that we can move water in the quickest time frame, and then how long Sonoma is going to allow you to purchase that water, whether, winter water, whether it's 2 months or 3 months. If you're down to 2 months, you're going to maximize your capacity, right? So that you can maximize the volume. So from our standpoint, we're just moving water, right? And then there's this other equation out there or discussion that has to happen of how long are we going to be able to do it for? So,
well, of course, our contract allows us to go to 14.3
acre feet or
1,000. Okay. And we're currently maybe 6.
Yeah, it's not allowed as much as is the water going to be available, right? Because we're talking about during a drought, in theory, there's an AR that hits the Russian River watershed. How long will the water that exceeds minimum stream flows in the Russian River be there from that one AR or that second AR? And it's looking at statistics and historical data and projections and all of that second piece that Tim's talking about.
Sort of. But when you have storage, whether it's in Sonoma or we have it, it changes that equation a little bit because
that's right.
You now have the ability to bring the water down anytime if you can afford it.
Right. Yeah. Right. And we're going to be talking, right, today we're talking about conveyance, and then late at the end of the month, we're going to be talking about storage in a similar fashion. There will be the need certainly to bring the convergence of both of those and talk about how the nexus between them.
Sure.
And that goes back to the slide that Paul was showing of, conveyance and storage and, the verticality of when do you make the decision and how does it affect one versus the other?
Do you have a feel for flow versus volume? What's more economical to build a place to put it or to bring it down faster?
I don't have a feeling because I'm not looking at storage. I'll let Zav.
You got it. Okay. Sure. If I could add a comment there, I think it depends a lot on water availability. So we're still trying to quantify that. And we have baseline numbers, but I think we want to understand the uncertainty over the long term with climate impact. So, it depends on that among other things. Of course, it depends on the capital cost of the various projects and their yields, but also how often you need to operate them and how often, at what rate you're allowed to operate them. Like, is there water actually there? So there are some variables that still need to be better quantified to answer that question in short.
Don't we have the right already? I mean, if we had the transmission capacity, we could be asking or taking the 14.3.
As long as in this case, we're above minimum in-stream flows in the Russian and we're not impinging any other Sonoma customers.
That's in the contract too?
Yeah, it's available capacity in their transmission system. And that's what Xavier is saying. We kind of have that baseline information. And we also have baseline information of what's available in terms of, hydrology in the Russian River. But we want to start looking at some of the extremes, the climate models that may impact that, because that's going to determine, for example, how long you can pump at 13 MGD. Is it 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months? That's very different. You may be quite happy with PADA 1 at 10 MGD if we've got 5-6 months of pumping capacity. So things like that we need to evaluate.
Of course, that's another twist in this cost-wise, because now you're talking about, I don't know, $100 in MGD or something like that for pumping. more, perhaps.
I'll suggest, if we can reduce some of the complexity in all of this by narrowing down some of the options, that at least seems like one good step forward. So I'll suggest we continue with the current analysis.
I think the problem with that, Ranjit, is the base cost. I'm concerned that we're at levels that are too high for the district to afford any of the alternatives.
So on cost, understanding it is a very significant issue. Our plan is to bring a discussion focused on cost between what we're looking between this meeting and the meeting we're going to have on storage, to review with the board this last rate increase, the money that we have, how much money in the current plan going forward, in the current plan that within this rate increase that the board adopted, how much money is there for this project. And with other funding, interestingly, these numbers are generally within the available funds.
380 million?
Not the Cotati, not the extreme costs, but specifically, I'm getting ahead of myself, but we will have about 9 million to cover debt service. And today's interest rates, it's ranges 150 million, call it. Interest rates drop a little bit, it goes up,
Sure,
pretty significantly.
Sure.
And then, we're expecting to augment that with grant funding and the like.
I say let's keep this going. I think, but yeah, that 380 stands out as hard to imagine why that rises to the top of our economic and financial viability.
Exactly.
So, but let's keep going.
We understand that it may be an engineering feasibility, a maximum, but there's got to be that.
Right. It didn't score well in the economic.
Okay, so the one's bad. Okay,
It doesn't score well.
But the higher point score. Okay.
Better, right? It's an overall higher score because obviously it completes our project goal of reliability and resiliency really well. But
it's not possible.
But Paul, we did talk about this, anticipating this precise discussion. And our sense was leave it because that is the way it's scored. But hear the comments that we're hearing and we expect it to hear will put more emphasis on Pettit 3 and 4. And
it does make you question the scoring. I don't know. Sorry. It's how did the other financial metrics impact scoring if that one didn't knock it out completely? That should have knocked it out to 0, not 63 to me.
Well, if 1 out of your 6 or 7 criteria score poorly and all the others score well.
Depends on the weighting, Paul.
Well, I think it's good to see it this way, Paul, and I appreciate the way this is done because I think it's important for the public to understand, yes, if we want the perfect system, it's going to be really expensive.
Right.
Yes.
And we're not able to make that potentially. So we have to understand what's going to be best for our money. So seeing it this way, I think is actually a really good thing. And seeing that, hey, this is what we can afford to do. And this is the thought process and all of the attention and detail going into it. So thank you.
Yeah, the hooker is, though, you got to recognize that the pipe is where the problem is. In other words, if you don't put the pipe in, you can never bring it down. I don't believe there will ever be a second. In other words, if you phase this, I don't think that part is in the equation to put a second pipeline parallel.
Yeah.
That's just, so you got to bite the bullet going in to size the pipe, even if you don't use it. And that's the tricky part.
Yeah. So I think as we go through, you'll see how we arrived at the short list, and you'll see also as we go on, our job with the short list is to help try to refine some of these costs. Obviously, this is pipeline costs, and Tim's going to talk a little bit more about this maybe in subsequent presentations, but there's a significant portion of paving that we've just assumed that we need to do as some of these projects. And there are potentials for us to maybe think about overland routes that don't require paving or off to the shoulder. That type of refinement comes later.
Sure.
So we still have work to do. These are not final numbers. These are just our current best estimates.
Do we have any idea why the contract's at 14.3, but the pipeline is only at 7 or some number like that? You know, why they originally decided to downsize the pipeline? Or maybe they thought we wouldn't go in, huh?
North Marin's decision, wasn't it, on the pipeline?
Well,
early?
kind of, but our contract, you know, they agreed to 14.3.
Yeah.
We agreed to 14.3 without any ability to get it. I don't exactly know what the history of that was.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Okay.
Okay. Moving on. So our proposed short list of the projects for further analysis. So this is like the end of phase 1 of this project. Phase 2 is going to be taking the 3 projects or alternatives to the next phase to look in more detail at them. So the potential short list of projects for deeper analysis are the PETA 3, PETA 4, and Cotati 3. And so then what we did is we looked at, for this presentation, is how might we phase these? And so for the PETA 3 alternative, Paul, you might start at the Stafford Lake and go out to Sulahui with a pipeline and a pump station to get it out there. Phase 2 would then be to add the parallel piping from the existing aqueduct out to Stafford Lake to maximize the capacity and to relieve, get you off of the North Marin pipeline. Increase in the Castagna pump station pumping capacity would be phase 3. And then phase 4 would be the STS to bring more capacity from the tanks, the existing Cotati tanks down to, phase 4 would be the section of pipeline that gets you down to Nicasio. And then, Paul? Oh, yeah. So PETA 4 alternative, as I mentioned earlier.
So sorry, Tim, but phase 4 on the last one, the Sulahui to, okay, that bypasses then, phase 4 bypasses Sulahui.
Well, so we've already gone out to Sulahui in phase 1, and we're taking water in phase 4 from the pipeline, the red pipeline, down to Nicasio to augment the storage capacity at Nicasio.
So we'd be able to fill up.
Right. Yeah. Good. Okay.
Okay. So then the PETA 4 alternative is we start off by going from the existing aqueduct at the 42-inch out San Antonio Road to Sulahui and a pump station, obviously, to get the water out there. Phase 2 would then be to build one of the STSs to allow more capacity from Cotati down to Castagna. Phase 3 would be to increase the capacity of Castagna to be able to get more water down. And then phase 4 would be another offshoot from the red line, which took us out to Sulahui down to Nicasio to be able to augment both storage capacities, reservoirs. Any questions on that? Nope. So then the final one is Cotati 3 alternative. Phase 1 would be from Cotati tanks down to Sulahui and 2 pump stations. Obviously, that's a big cost. And that's the disadvantage of Cotati 3 is you really only have 2 phases. And the second phase would be to extend down to Nicasio. So that one's not as feasible and flexible as PETA 3 and PETA 4. So, summary of the attributes shared by the top alternatives is all of the top alternatives address the project goal by enhancing drought reliability. The top alternatives are the most flexible version of a cluster of alternatives. So, for example, PETA 3 and PETA 4 are the best of the PETA options. PETA 3 includes a staff option. PETA 4 includes an STS, a Southern Transmission System options. And Cotati 3 is the best of the Cotati options, obviously very expensive. So kind of to Director Matt, your comment about, that's like the ultimate, it's like buying a Cadillac, so to speak, and understanding what the costs of that are. Huh? Rolls Royce. Yeah. Point well taken, Director.
So Cotati 3 is, double the cost and doesn't have the flexibility of the phasing, right? So essentially the first phase, you're building the project. So I from my view, it's a policy decision potentially to look at that one and say, does the board want that to be carried forward, or do we just want the two PETAs carried forward? I mean, the two PETAs are good projects. They have phasing, they capture different elements in them. Alternatively, we could do Cotati 3 light and kind of conformational review and not go the depth unless we find something. So we could take the board direction on the approach to that one.
And then the last bullet is all of the alternatives permit a degree of phasing and optionality.
I have a couple more slides that might shed some light on this question too.
Okay, Tim, maybe just it'd be good to know at what point. So clearly the phasing, the ability to put in the different segments in an order is important, but we don't know how many phases we have to implement for benefiting from additional water.
I think President Kush, the next couple slides might shed some light on our thinking along those lines. So, yeah, as if we knew your question here. So this, we took the example.
I thought I had studied before the meeting, right?
So this is an example, maybe the one with the most phasing capability, and it's kind of a complicated graph, but I'll show you that we're going through time, as always. So first, the red line is that's the capital investment. So it imagines we're starting right now, just to make it simple. But of course, we have more steps to do. And we just launch right in and start building phase 1. That's that pipe that starts roughly in the vicinity of Stafford Lake and goes out to Suluhuli. And that would, when completed, give us yield right away, even though it wouldn't be the full build out. So the yield line that's the blue line. So that's the MGD you can read over on the left axis. So with that, you get, and we're showing it as 5 MGD with a halo of uncertainty around it, because we have been in discussions with North Marin. It's their pipe we'd be using. And so there is a band of how much we could actually get out of the pipe to reflect that uncertainty. We're showing that as, well, we don't really know, but it is a building block, and it certainly provides some benefit relatively soon. So that's the first phase. And you have that full optionality. You can, at every one of these decision points, same kind of convention as Paul's slide to open this discussion. At each one of these points, you get to decide. I mean, just like right now, do we build phase 1 or not is the first decision. And then after you build it and operate it for a little while, you get to decide, well, are we going to do the next level of spend for the next level of yield? And so that's the next, so Paul's tracing out the trajectory there. You'd build that, and there the capacity lines start to converge, because we wouldn't be borrowing capacity in the North Marin line. Instead, it'd be a dedicated line. So the halo part goes away, and it's a firmer 10 MGD capacity of that pipe. And you could operate that for a while and then have another decision point. Oh, based on, first, are we getting the 10? We'd expect to get the 10, but we haven't yet quantified, well, how many months will we actually be allowed to use the 10? So based on that, you get to reassess, well, how important is it? And when do we need it? When should we build the next phase? So, any one of these decision points, you could just go into a pause mode based on finance or based on need, whatever it may be, and then do it later. But we're showing the full build out here, and it gets you all the way to the, when you're done, you get 14 MGD of capacity, and you have a lot of flexibility, and those are all on the maps that Tim just showed you. And you're coming in today's dollars, just under 200 million. That's just one example. There is kind of the gallery shows you for the 3 shortlisted ones, lesser level of detail, but they're all on the same scale here. And it shows you they each have some degree of both capital investment and yield that goes with it over time. And I think these graphs, they illustrate one thing, which is, hey, why is Cotati 3 in the mix still? And the reason is PETA 4 and Cotati 3 finish pretty much at the same point. So depending on where we end up thinking we need to go on capacity, if you booted Cotati 3 because it's expensive, it could turn out, well, PETA 4 falls for the same reason, and then you really don't have alternatives. So that was our thinking is we will learn more about where is this capacity picture likely to end up, because we're still looking at water availability and so on. But that's the reasoning is we want to have a robust set of alternatives to really support a comparative analysis, even though I think we've resoundingly said we like projects with a lot of flexibility, optionality. All those are good things, but we still want these bookends.
Sorry, can you help explain where you got the extra couple $100 million in here?
Oh, why is it tapping? Oh, it's not calling out a new price tag for PETA 3. It's just showing you that I think it's a little faint on the projector.
Just the PETA 4 jumped from.
It's 378 million, I think.
Is that what it was?
That's
before?
the build
There were two different numbers in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
yeah.
But it's within our estimating error.
And do these take into account, do we need to
augment
augment our storage capacity or dam building in Suluhuli or Nicasiota in order to take this water?
No.
Because it's a drought time when it's happening? Is that, or?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't engineered that level of detail, but these projects provide independent value, regardless of what may happen with expanding one reservoir or building another one. These all provide benefit on their own.
There's also just, we were touching on this earlier. There's probably some limit on what we'll be able to take from the Russian River in the winter under severe drought conditions. It may be that it's highly unlikely it would hit 30 MGD, right? Or the total volume that we might achieve with a 30 MGD system.
So as we mentioned earlier, we haven't seen the full range of hydrology from Sonoma yet, but we do have 1976 and 77. And during those years, there was substantial water availability in the Russian. More than actually I thought.
It wasn't, if I recall, I think on average, 2 million acre feet go out into the ocean on a year. And the least that has ever happened in a drought was an additional 80,000 acre feet.
That's right.
Above the minimum.
That's right.
And so we're not even approaching that here.
Right. So overcapacity is not a concern.
Doesn't seem like it. It'll be a concern, but there's a lot of water up there.
Yeah. It's looking good. That's as much as we could really say right now.
It seems to me that pretty soon we need to start talking about dollars per acre foot, because this is capital. Then you have operations, and then you have time. So, we may have that beautiful roll sitting out there, but we can only use it 2 months of the year, which is going to dramatically increase the dollars per acre foot. So I think we need to start getting that into that thinking pretty soon, because I'm afraid that we're talking about really big numbers in dollars per acre foot.
We will, as Ben mentioned, we'll be trying to squeeze that in somewhere around April 16th, I'm hoping.
Yeah, Paul, the problem I see is just, there's so many loose ends. Mm-hmm. I'm not criticizing, but there's just so many things you don't know, and
yeah, we're not there yet to be able to tell you this is the cost.
I don't think you'd be there on the 16th either.
No,
okay.
But we can start the discussion about how we might go about doing that and what the assumptions are, and just kind of introduce those notions.
Sure. No, that's fair. I mean, it's engineering. You got to make assumptions and things like that. It's just that I think that the dollars per acre foot may even speak louder than these numbers. I mean, these are breathtaking to me, the capital. And then when you throw in the operations cost, this isn't our water. So now we have to buy it. And if we put it in the reservoir, if we did that, then we got to treat it. So now it's another, $700, $800 an acre foot on top of whatever it costs us to get the water. I don't know. The numbers, I mean, it's going to all come back to what we talked about earlier today, Ben, which is you know, the question we've been asked, I think you guys have asked it, is how much money are you willing to spend to reduce the frequency?
Yeah, it's
and how much frequency reduction do you need? You know, that's the problem.
And, you know, part of, and I think we're all feeling this, part of a phased approach, the benefit is it is a way to manage uncertainty through adaptive management, right? And so as we go forward, we'll be thinking about what would be criteria for hitting next phases, you know, including demand, climate change, and the like. So it does give us that opportunity in a way to think about the uncertainty and sort of manage it with this stepwise approach.
Okay. So our last slide is just reflecting, you know, we've got some work to do. Refining the alignments, studying environmental constraints, which we haven't talked about at all yet. And this big question that Director Russell's raised on life cycle cost. We understand it's a huge factor in everything that we're doing. We do still, of course, need to continue to evaluate the yield and the benefit, and that's going to be through modeling and discussions with our partners, North Marin. You know, how amenable will they be to operating their system in a way that benefits us, but maybe stresses their system. And then we'll be coming back to the board on conveyance, particularly in May, for another update. And we're going to continue to bring you updates on storage. You heard from Ben, I think we're targeting April 30th board meeting for kind of a similar presentation to get to a short list on storage. And then we'll be arriving at our sort of preferred alternatives this summer. And that concludes our presentation for the evening.
Thank you, Paul, Tim, Xavier. For additional board comments and questions, Matt, start with you this time.
Well, it's getting exciting as we whittle that list down. So even with the, you know, every time we whittle down, more questions pop up, but it's still, I'm excited to keep moving on this. A couple of questions. If you, we don't have to bring the slide back up, but one of the difference between PETA 3 and PETA 4 looked like the yield over time. And was that because we're not going to be augmenting the Southern Transmission System? Is that is that why it's just not going to produce enough?
Yeah.
Or as much, the same amount?
If you remember, PETA 4 also has the advantage that it comes off, as Tim was saying, off the 42-inch.
Right.
So there's just inherently more capacity available to flow through that new piping for PETA 4. Whereas the PETA 3 is lower down in the Novato area. And by then we've got more constraints on how much water we can fit through that segment of pipe.
Great. So, no, thank you for that. And then looking at PETA 4 is the phased approach. The last phase brings the pipe from the new constructed pipe that's headed to Sewahuli down into Nicasio. Would that be redundant at all, considering we're looking to invest in pipe and a pump station right now from Sewahuli to Nicasio as part of our internal infrastructure?
I don't think so, Director Sampson. And the reason is that there's obviously water in Sewahuli that we need to access regardless of whether we build this project. So sort of to the independent utility of enhancing storage and these conveyance pipelines, there's also this independent utility of, for example, electrifying the Sewahuli pump station and being able to bring that water into Nicasio. When we bring the conveyance water in, that's really going to be, you know, dry drought emergency conditions when we would be using that pipeline. That helps. Whereas we'd be able to use the Sewahuli pipeline sooner than that.
Gotcha. No, and that does help. I'm looking at a phased approach in terms of the alternatives. Would we see a big benefit and not be operationally constrained when we're addressing the next drought if we had just phase 1 of PETA 4 done without the additional pipeline down to Nicasio? Would it be, you know, operationally sustainable if we pumped water into Sewahuli and then pumped that through the system that way?
We think so at this point, but that's one of the things we'll be looking at. And if you remember, we've paused the Sewahuli pump station sizing,
right,
kind of based on, we want to look at that very question.
Great. No, I appreciate that. And then lastly, and I know we're not there yet, but as we get closer to these preferred alternatives, understanding what the phased cost for each would be as broken down would be very helpful in the decision-making process. But thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Jed?
Would it make sense to have the pipe go from Stafford to Nicasio first and not to Sulhuli? I was wondering why that came in last.
It's actually longer to get to Nicasio.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we took the shortest route.
Yeah.
And the other factor is Sulhuli doesn't spill quite as often as Nicasio. So you've got a little bit less risk of if you fill that lake up with water from Sonoma that kind of going over the spillway.
So I think my two high level points to consider are, one, our strategic plan has us having a smaller number of acre feet as a goal than you have in two of your proposals. I think you have in the 30,000 acre feet realm, if I'm not mistaken.
So what we presented tonight very intentionally was MGD.
Right.
That's really the only thing we can speak to right now.
Right.
We don't know how long we'll be able to operate at 30 MGD. So that
Hard to
30
tell.
MGD might be
Might be a lot less.
acre feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it would be good to figure that out and start to map in exactly what we're going to be getting out of it and when in the timeline that Larry was saying. So I'll definitely support that concept. The second is, the sooner we get our financial projections together and what our bond capacity is, the better, because my instinct is 200 is about the max. Maybe it'll be a little bit more. And if these are $400 million in 2024 dollars, and we're talking about doing this 20 years from now, I have a hunch we might be asking you to go forward and looking at two plans here that we'll never be able to do. So the sooner we get our what's our actual funding capacity here, the better we'll save your time. And maybe some of the other options in your conveyance analysis will bubble up to the top because they'll be possible and those two might not be possible.
Those are good points. Keep in mind that today we're using what, 24 MGD, 22, 25, something like that. Total flow.
Yeah, you mean specifically today or?
Well,
I don't know, March, it's
average.
been a wet month, but yeah, average 2022, something like that, yeah.
And my thinking is, how much would the estimates improve if we stopped right now on the engineering side? Forget about the improving the alignment and all that stuff. Just say, are we at a plus 1.25, 25%? It could go up 50%, 10%.
Well, yeah, at this level of planning level budgets, you're at, what is it, a class 4? So you're,
class 5.
Class 5. So you're
minus 30 plus
minus
50.
30 to plus 50.
Right. So if you think about that in terms of where to put effort, I mean, you could just assume the worst and call that your engineering. Hit it with 1.5. I think the numbers are so high that if they're 1.5, it wouldn't make any difference. In other words, I just am, I don't see a pathway here, because the part you talked about the capital, but don't forget the operations. That's the other side running in the back, is that it is a lot of money. And I mean, I could see us spending, if you let these things go, at 50 million a year operating addition to where we are today, something like that. So, I'm just concerned that we're spending a lot of effort for maybe a diminished return, because, if we get to the point, and you're right about the bonding, but I'm not even sure that's going to matter. Okay. Because I think these numbers are past that,
On the operating, the way I've been thinking about it, unlike, for example, desal or IPR, that you do have to operate continuously, whether it's storage or conveyance, it's largely capital, because you're only going to use it when you need it in a very dry year. And in that time, you're only buying the water you need. you're probably restricted from getting your full allotment, you know, from Sonoma. So it's not, I don't know, it's an additional big operating cost, but the capital is certainly daunting.
That's an interesting point. I'd have to think that one through a little more. I think it's the answer to that is sorta. You know, you still got to cash flow it,
right,
and it's above what it's currently costing us.
Right.
Now, maybe that's just the cost of doing business. You know, that's just how it is. But it seems to me that when you're purchasing that water, it's worse. You know, you're correct. And that's what I'm thinking about is you're correct. You're just buying what you need, but it's more expensive,
right,
than we're currently paying,
right,
for that amount of water.
Good points, tough issues. I wanted to there's one, I think, other high level maybe issue that we should keep in mind as we're working through all this complexity is that in July, our customers are going to be experiencing the next round of rate increases in our 4-year rate structure. And that 4-year rate structure is built to support a lot of capital investment, as Ben just noted. It may not be sufficient for what we want to achieve here, but nevertheless, we're asking people to pay it. And when we send out our messaging for the rate increases that people are going to be seeing in July, I think it'll go down potentially a little bit easier if we have a line of sight towards something moving forward. So I actually think there's a pretty firm deadline as to how long we can bat ideas around without making decisions. And those decisions, I think, have to address the concerns that we're going to be hearing regarding the expense of water and how well that those additional revenues are being invested in ensuring that we're not in the situation when we were in 2021, when we were talking about spending a lot more money potentially for an emergency response. So
that's less than these numbers.
Less than these, but you know, it would still, and we didn't have the revenues at that time to support essentially any of it, but we had to do it almost, right?
We will be talking to the board along those lines. For example, when we talk about storage at the end of the month, we'll be talking about potentially spinning off the Nicasio raise, a small Nicasio raise, and just moving that quickly into environmental and design. So we'll be having those discussions to move maybe the no-brainers forward quickly.
Ben, you mean the flashboard option, yeah.
Yeah, I am going to underline this though. Paul, you and I live in the Ross Valley, San Anselmo. And in 2017, you know, a property tax assessment was passed to support flood control. And in the last elections, San Anselmo voted to extract itself from that. And I don't know where the facts actually fall on this, but the concern was that $52 million of our money plus grant money was spent on discussions essentially and in brainstorming and thinking through plans without ever accomplishing anything. And given how that has played out, I don't think we should underestimate the risk of potentially ending up there, you know. So a lot of money spent, not a lot of progress. So I do think we should keep it in mind. That for me, that was this whole flood control fiasco in the Ross Valley has been a very, very sobering experience. So
it's interesting. It is exactly the same question in reverse, because I would disagree with your conclusion. I don't know that the risk is any more today than it was a year ago of what we do or we don't do. So that's the problem. The same thing's true with flood control. It's a function of how intense it rains. And that's the same issue we have to deal with. What is available from nature, which we don't know, and you can't assume.
Yeah, no, I just don't know if we're talking about the same things, Larry. I'm saying if we're not committed to doing something with the money that we're asking people to invest in these new facilities, that's the risk, right? If we're not committed to actually doing something. I understand that the risks of flooding and drought are unpredictable, of course. But the risk I see is, 5-6 years from now, people start adding up what the additional revenues were that were meant to be invested in new water supply infrastructure. And then they start looking at what was actually done. It's not a good place to be.
Yeah, but I would say we approved the roadmap a year ago. You guys have made remarkable progress. We're going pretty darn deep into conveyance, into storage. We're getting to the point where I think that we're going to be able to make decisions. You're just saying we got to do it. So we are not doing nothing. We're doing a lot. And yeah, it's a good kick in the pants. Let's go. Let's make it happen as soon as we possibly can. And yes, by June, I think would be nice to have a really good update, and I think your timeline's been clear, and I'm supportive of it.
I think the other thing not to forget, the money will be spent. Okay, I have no question about that. Paul and the gang have identified the low-hanging fruit, the pinch points, or what do you want to call them, those system adjustments. Those are extremely valuable, and they need to be made. Then it gets more complicated. That's the easy round. The next year, maybe next 2 years, I don't know what happens after that, because it depends. I mean, if it really, really rains again, we have another year like this one, the need is complex. I know this is a longer term, but you have to remember, it's how much is it worth to buy the risk down from something that happens 20% of the time or 10% of the time or whatever the number is. How much are you willing to spend to buy that risk down?
Well, I think we found that we put that number into our 4-year rate structure, actually, Larry. I feel like we made that decision, right?
But you didn't have these numbers. So now it gets to the point that, that's where the hook is.
I'm sure we could go on. Thanks. I think I'm sure there's public comments too that will add to the discussion.
Yes, we have a couple so far. 1402, then Larry Minikis. Go ahead, 1402.
James Holmes, Larkspur. At a time when some recreation advocates purport rather tendentiously to channel MMWD founder William Kent's ideas about public access, it's well to remember that an even more fundamental principle underlying the district's founding was the desire to have an independent, self-sufficient water supply. As we analyze all the various iterations and complications of conveyancing, let's keep in mind that hauling water from elsewhere is no substitute for having it right here in the form of enhanced local supply. I think that the intricacies, complexities, and costs of the conveyancing options serve to confirm this point. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Minikis, please.
Yes, good evening. I appreciate the presentation, the thoughtful questions that everyone's been asking. And I think what we're seeing here is this is where the rubbers begin to really meet the road. And there's no real surprises here. If you've been following this process, it's going to be expensive. And I think the water district, and really all water districts in a sense, are the canaries in the coal mine. And that they have to look at climate change and its impact on them and its impact on infrastructure. And the cost of infrastructure is very high. And so going forward, these are all measures that are going to have to be weighed and decided upon. We're still very early in the process, I feel, even though we're beginning to narrow down, there's still a lot to look at. It's a complex matrix, and it's not something that you can lay out on a spreadsheet and look at and make decisions from, because it's multi-layered. There's so much to it, and I'm looking forward to the coming weeks of presentations because we are getting much closer. And last thing, Larry, I want to say your experience, your questions, your probing have been so valuable here and so helpful tonight. I certainly have learned a tremendous amount listening to you this evening, and really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
All right, then I think we're done with this item. Thank you again. And we'll move on to item 9, which is future board and committee meetings and upcoming agenda items.
Good evening. This Friday is the Operations Committee meeting / special meeting of the Board of Directors. The key item is the main break update. Also, the next Board of Directors meeting is April 16th. And the key item there will be the Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study. April 25th is the Finance and Administration Committee meeting. One of the key items is the quarterly HR update. In terms of external meetings, on April 8th is the Sonoma Water Advisory Committee, Technical Advisory Committee. And on April 19th, again, is the North Bay Watershed Association Conference. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Terry. And with that, we are adjourned.